Welcome to Vox Vomitus, also known as word vomit. Welcome, everybody, to Vox Vomitus. We are live. So welcome to Vox Vomitus. Trisha and Allison are here. Allison was already drinking. I am Jennifer Ann Gordon. You are your host for Vox Vomitus, also known as Word Vomit. I am joined, as always, by my two Vox Vomitus vixens, Allison Martine, the author of the Bourbon books, and Trisha, author of the Beyond series. We are thrilled to say today we have Paul Tremblay, who is one of my favorite authors and a fellow New Englander. So I feel like we have some solidarity there with our New England awkwardness. So welcome, Paul. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you first and foremost. There may be giant thunderstorms in a half an hour, so if if I suddenly lose power, that's what happened. Geez, tell me about yourself. The hardest question ever. No, so I've been writing, horror for with William Morrow. It's really been the last 5 years that sort of my career has turned around. But I've been writing, I guess, seriously, quote unquote, seriously, since about 2000. Started off mainly writing horror short stories, and then I happened to write these sort of two goofy and dark detective novels that sold but didn't do so well. But luckily I got a second chance and got to reinvent myself as myself with A Head Full of Ghosts in 2015. And otherwise, I live outside of Boston. You may hear a barking dog or a kid coming to the kitchen to get some food. Those are things beyond my control.
Those are the things beyond all of our control. So
yes.
As a fellow New Englander, yes, we might be having thunderstorms almost at any minute. And when that happens, my dog will bark as well. But Trisha's dogs are pretty low key, no matter the weather.
I lock them out. I lock them out. You can't hear them.
Oh, you lock them out?
I lock them out because they're ridiculous.
So once again, Paul, thank you for being here. You have what I would consider the novel of the year with Survivor Song.
Oh, thank you.
And I read a lot of books, and you are one of my favorites. Survivor Song is incredibly timely for what's happening in our world right now. Can you tell us a little bit about 2 years ago when you started to write Survivor Song? What your thinking was behind that.
Sure. Well, first, thank you. I mean, for the kind comments. I mean, as far as books of the year, I mean, 2020, I think the one good thing that's happened this year, we've just had it's an amazing amount of horror and just literature in general that have come out almost within 2 months of each other, like Stephen Graham Jones's, Good Indians, Sylvia Marino Garcia's, Mexican Gothic, Grady Hendrix's novel in April.
Valerie.
There's just been, so many great novels. But so anyway, I laughed to myself a little bit because the novel sort of started with a little bit of panic because with The Cabin at the End of the World, I had signed a 3-book deal with William Morrow. And it was Cabin at the End of the World, Growing Things, and then some other novel. And it was due in August of 2019. So for most of 2018, or at least half of 2018, I had this other novel in my head. It was sort of big and messy. And I kept putting it off. And then finally, when July rolled around, I was like, well, there's no way I could write this book because it would take me longer than a year. So I think I was kind of looking for an excuse to not do that book. I mean, maybe I'll do it someday, but so I happened to be in England of all places. I had never left the North American continent before. But my British publisher had sent me over with Cabin at the End of the World to do a 1-week book tour. It was amazing.
Oh, love it.
So I was sitting on a train between a couple of English cities with one of my, do I have a notebook around here? I usually keep a bunch of little notebooks like this around. I honestly have 8 to 10 of them because I lose them frequently. And then it's kind of fun. When I find one, it's oh, what's in this one? Maybe it's an idea that's something that's good. But once I get going, I usually, if it's a book for a particular novel, I don't lose that one. But I was just sitting on the train sort of in a panic. It's like, it's just like 13 months away, this deadline. I need to figure out what the next book is going to be. So I was just brainstorming, and I don't know, like a few of my books anyway, Head Full of Ghosts and Cabin at the End of the World sort of riffed on a horror trope. So I was like kind of writing down some horror tropes. I wrote down zombies, and like most everybody, even though all of us or most of us still like zombies, there was a little zombie fatigue. So I wrote down zombie, and I was like, oh. I was like, no, but then, oh, wait a minute. And then I had this what if that I don't want to say unless you want to talk spoilers. Because the what if sort of gives away what the book is, but I had this original what if.
I don't want to talk spoilers.
Yeah, that's fine. So anyway, so I had this original, I had this original what if, and I think I do mention it at the very end of the book.
Yeah, you mentioned it in the credits.
Yes, and the acknowledgments, that's right, yeah. So if you read the book, you'll see what the what if was. I don't know, and I sort of weirdly, once I had the what if in my head, so I'm like, well, how would I play with a quote unquote zombie set and try to make it as realistic as possible, something that could happen, or come close to seeming like it could happen. And I instantly thought of rabies. I had sort of just the good fortune of reading or listening to the audiobook of a book on rabies a couple of years prior to that, just for fun. I listened to like
the good fortune of a rabies book.
Right.
Rabies for fun.
Rabies for fun. That's actually the title of the book I read. Rabies for fun.
Rabies for everybody. Rabies for babies. It could be anything.
Yeah.
Not the baby rabies.
I don't.
Yeah.
Write that one down. That one's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
No, it is not. Keep going.
So. Oh yeah, this is why the show's called Word Vomit.
Yeah, so I listened to that book on rabies called Rabbit. I forget the subtitle. It's a really fascinating book. I mean, I knew a little bit about rabies, but I had no idea, sort of the history of it and how strange a virus it is. And so having sort of had that information in the back of my head, I was like, oh, I could do this book, I think, with the what if, and with the zombies being somewhat realistic, rabies would be perfect for it. So that was really where I started.
Now, you just said that you were in England then. Is that where Ram's voice comes from? Is that why she's in there?
Oh, definitely, yeah. It was definitely a definite nod to, the beginning point of the novel. And some of the British towns that end up getting mentioned, like South Shields and Newcastle, were places that I visited. South Shields, my maternal grandmother was born there. And I never got to know her because she died before I was born. But so that was kind of fun to see South Shields from where my grandmother was from. And there's this weird thing called the vampire rabbit. That's a real thing. Yeah, I guess I won't say too much more about that too, but that makes it a very small appearance. It's not a huge deal, but that's yeah. But that's
a vampire rabbit that has a cameo.
Yes.
So you wrote the novel. Obviously, it was a long process, and come February 2020, our world drastically changes. Was there a point in your thinking that you thought maybe this isn't the right time for a pandemic novel, or were you thinking, okay, I know I'm going to get asked this all the time. No, this isn't based on COVID. Like,
oh yeah. I mean, I asked my publishers, like, should we put this off? Or, and they were like, no, it's going to come out when it comes out. They never, at least to me, maybe behind the scenes, they questioned it, but I never got the sense that they were ever going to change when it was coming out. No, it was totally weird because a lot of the medical research that I did, my sister Erin, who's a nurse at one of the biggest hospitals in Boston, helped me with like, what would a hospital's response be? There's a text exchange in the novel that's pretty much a text exchange that she and her coworkers had in 2014 when they had thought that they might be getting some Ebola patients. It's funny that she sort of saved that, but I remember when it was happening, she was freaking out with good reason, because their hospital's response initially to the potential of getting Ebola patients wasn't confidence filling, let's say. Luckily, the hospital sort of came to their senses, and said they would go with volunteers first and actually get them proper PPE, which was the first time I had ever heard that acronym. Now that everybody knows it. Now, obviously,
I know everybody knows it, and you threw it around in your book very comfortably. written, a year ago, which.
Well, it's fun when I was rewriting that text stuff. Like I was like, how much of this do I explain? Because I do think at one point, so I had to have one of the people say in text personal protection equipment, and then just go PP after that. So I remember thinking, who's gonna? I wanted to keep the text almost like as is and not explain everything like you would as an author, but just have it be like a natural exchange. It's weird, like some of the parts of books that you remember writing, and there's parts that you don't remember writing. And that's a part, like I feel like I wrote that yesterday. I still remember working through that and wondering, who's going to understand what PPE, represents.
And thanks to COVID, everybody does. So
yeah.
Thanks, COVID, for doing some of your work for you.
I know. So you have, I have to ask this because it's my favorite animal, the foxes. Why with the foxes? I love foxes so much, and Romola, Ram's favorite animal is a fox, which I absolutely love. Is that personal to you? Is that personal to somebody you know? Is it none of our business?
No, it's no. I mean, it's not personal to me or to anybody I know. I mean, I think foxes are cute. I think I'd seen some around here, and then once I got deeper into the novel and saw that like Grimm's fairy tales were playing sort of a part in what was going on, I thought that was a good animal to have as sort of a bridge between some of the fantasy stuff and some of the reality stuff. And so I mean, sometimes stuff like that is you just trust your subconscious as to why it goes in there. Like when I'm in the middle of writing something and something sort of weird or unexpected happens, I don't try to dissect it right then. It's like, well, if I can figure out why it's supposed to be there by the end of the book, then great. But if I get to the end and I don't know why it's there, then it's gonna come out.
Yeah, if it's not Chekhov's fox, it has to go.
Right. Foxes are cute. We have one that lives very, that's sprinted through our yard all summer long. I think that lives like in the woods that's close by. I don't know, and it's sort of a very British thing too. I know there's a lot more foxes in Britain or in England, even like in London. I have friends tell me that foxes are regular sightings in a big city like London, which is weird to me. You're not going to see a fox in Boston.
They're like the raccoon. No.
Right. Yeah.
No. I think you have to go to like a zoo.
I was going to say, can we trade you our coyotes for your foxes? Because that's what we have here. Like a friend a couple days ago posted on Facebook, there's a coyote walking on their back cinder block wall, just like walking on the wall. And I'm going, no, I don't want that in my yard. Thanks anyway, guys. Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we've had, coyotes, obviously it's much more prevalent where you are in Southern California, but they've really sort of moved in here into New England as well. We get coyotes. Sometimes I'll wake up and hear them sort of chittering in the dead of night. I hope it's a coyote.
I hope it's a coyote. It could be some sort of monster.
It's a zombie.
So it's New England. Weird things happen. I think I had a question, but I'm going to wait on it. I'm going to throw this over to Allison and Trisha to see if they have any pertinent questions for you before I ask you something absolutely ridiculous.
Pertinent.
Right.
Have I ever asked anything pertinent, Jen?
Pertinent.
Yeah.
So,
Trisha, did you have anything?
Trisha.
Well, you mentioned if something's there and it wasn't planned and you wait until the end of the book to see if it fits. Is that how you, because I know sometimes when you're writing, it takes a different path. And sometimes the characters do things that you hadn't expected. Is that what you usually do? Do you usually wait until the end of the book to see if it's taking you in a new path? How do you handle that? Because it's kind of difficult if it's on a new path to wait till the end of the book.
Right. No, for sure. And depending on the book, I'd say more times than not, I've written sort of like a summary or an outline of just a plot summary or a plot outline. I haven't done it with every book. And with Survivor Song, it really was sort of like a half-assed summary. It was only like 3 pages, and like 2 of the pages was essentially the outline of the first 100 pages of the book. And then like the next 2/3 of the book was sort of like hand wavy. Like I knew where I wanted to end up. I knew where the ending was. So that book, I felt like was a lot more written by the seat of my pants for the last couple 100 pages, as opposed to something like, I don't know, maybe even like A Cabin at the End of the World. Although I sort of left the end for that one sort of in flux too. Yeah, and it's not always the end of the book. Like, depending on what sneaks in there, right? If it starts if it's going to put me on a different branch, I would have to know right away, I think. But if it's something that I can leave for a little bit, just let simmer. And usually, time helps me figure out, whether it's a day or a week or 2 weeks, then maybe I can see it more clearly. And for more times than not, for me, it's little things that are sort of like garnish to whatever is happening. Basil. Is it basil? We're going to call the
basil. Some shredded basil.
Or something like something fun, like in A Head Full of Ghosts. Yeah, in A Head Full of Ghosts, I didn't write a summary. I sort of just knew what I wanted to do for the most part. At least I knew the structure, so that let me do some things, left leeway. Well, like super early in the novel, I knew, or I put in as a character trait. Oh, Mary doesn't like spaghetti sauce. My son didn't like spaghetti sauce when he was a kid. So, I was just always annoyed that I would have to, if I was making pasta, I'd have to make, his separate, with butter and stuff. And when it came toward the end of the novel, like, I didn't know how I was going to do, like, the poison thing that's going to happen toward the end of that book. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is the perfect vehicle. Like, I hadn't planned it, but, it worked out perfectly, for that, or at least I was able to make that connection, later on. So that, like, I would have been happy with the spaghetti sauce as just like a fun character quirk, but it ended up becoming like an important thing later that I didn't anticipate. And those are like the few and far between fun moments for me as a writer, because like most people, it's, I mean, for me, what I'm addicted to is when I'm addicted to being done and being excited about this thing that I've created. But like in the middle of it, I really don't like it. It's really hard to drag my butt to the keyboard and write.
You like having written.
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah. I like having written.
So I saw something on Instagram the other day that you were doing, you did like a 60-second tour of your writing space with a library. Was it Sturgis Library? Something like that?
60-second tour was, I took over like HarperCollins's Instagram or something.
Oh, that was that. Yeah. Okay. So you said that you showed that you put a donut on your computer so you would go back to work. And I loved that so much. But
like author bait.
I think author bait. Come here. But I think as myself as a writer, I like the process more than probably being done. But I think, do you think because you are analytical and you're a math person, you are a smart math person, you love the solutions of problems, whereas I'm just like a dumb theater kid and I'm like, I just want to explore whatever's happening.
Yeah, that's maybe. I mean, everyone's different. I mean, that's sort of like the fun and frustrating part for writing is that, every writer's different. So like if you're just starting out, it's very frustrating because no one can tell you like what to do, or no one can point to you and say, this is how it's going to work best for you. You kind of have to figure it out. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's how it works for me. Cause I've always wished I could be someone who could just like spill it all out at once and then revise, rewrite. Cause actually I don't mind. I like the revising, editing part because I feel like, okay, I have this thing that's done. I mean, there's still frustrations and it can suck too, but then I feel like I'm getting more excited because I'm much closer to being the thing. I will have to admit the donut thing. I don't do that all the time. We just happened to have donuts that morning, so I put it on my computer as a delicious prop. I did eat it.
It looked delicious. Was it Dunkin' Donuts? Was it New England staple?
It was honeydew.
Honeydew?
Okay.
Yeah. I don't even know what that is.
That's a New England. It's a New England, local chain. Yeah.
We don't have that here. Sorry. Yeah. Right over.
We don't have it here.
Oh, I feel like it's Dunkin' Donuts except with more sugar and amazing fat added to it, so it tastes even better. Is that?
I do think.
Am I correct in that?
Probably. Their donuts are better.
You're going to be run out of Boston for saying that.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask a little bit about how you structure things, because I thought one of the most unusual things when I read Survivor Song was how it flowed as far as like the interlude sections. That totally caught me off guard. And I don't remember reading anything like that recently. Are most of your novels structured that way, or was that special for that? And was that something you planned to do, or did that just kind of come organically?
So that was, I guess unique to this book. Although I kind of think a lot of my novels and stories have some sort of narrative, not trick necessarily, but maybe, a different way of presenting the narrative. Yeah, I'd say fairly early on, I knew part of it was a holdover from the title itself, Survivor Song. And when I first started, I really tried to force the book into a song structure where I was saying, because preludes, interlude, and postlude are names of song parts.
Right.
And I'd start off by naming some of the other chapters like by first verse, second verse. And, it didn't quite work. But, I stuck with the 3 sections that were named after the song sections because those were written sort of in a slightly different style, or if not in a slightly different style, they were presented in a more sort of storybook manner. I was really excited to write the interlude. Like for me, there's usually for every book, there's usually a couple of scenes in every book that are like the carrot at the end of the stick for me. It's like, oh, I can't wait to get to that part. Really, I really want to dig into that and write that scene. Yes. And so I would never like skip around as a writer. Like I go in the order in which I think things are going to happen because I would only go write the scene that I would want to write, and then the rest of the book would be miserable. Like I need to work up to and reward myself with the scene
that scene is the donut.
That scene is the donut. Yeah,
that's your donut on the computer.
I definitely have metaphysical or metaphorical donuts in my writing for sure. I had one of my favorite contemporary novelists who isn't a horror writer is Patrick DeWitt. He wrote The Sisters Brothers, Major Domo Minor, and most recently French Exit. Just very witty, dry, kind of dark books, but it's definitely considered literary sort of humor fiction. And in his book, Major Domo Minor, most of the book is from the point of view of the sort of sad sack character. But he has like an interlude in the middle. That's another character, and it was just beautiful. And it was just like this other story sort of attached to the rest of the story. And in the back of my head, it's like, oh, I always want to try that at some point. And it ended up being Survivor Song.
So, as I said, Survivor Song for me is like my book of the year because I think it hits on a lot of emotional levels. The interlude, and I'm trying to say all of this without any spoilers. Your interlude in Survivor Song, Paul, I cried from the first words of that until the end. It was so beautiful, and it was my donut on the computer. I loved the entire book, but that specific interlude, so if anybody's listening to this, you have to read Survivor Song. You have to read Survivor Song, period. But this interlude is the most like tender, horrifying, beautiful writing that I've read in the past several years. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks. No, those 2 characters sort of mean a lot to me. I don't know. I mean, without spoiling too much, those 2 characters appeared in a different novel or played a big part in a prior novel.
Yes, they did.
So it was kind of, it was fun to sort of revisit with them again and sort of tell, the next part of their story, as it were. Well, thank you. No, so maybe because we're writing that part, it's sort of that joy, even though it's pretty horrible, came out. I don't know.
It was beautifully written, and yes, I recognized them from one of your other works, and I was incredibly excited because I thought it was a beautiful tribute to people who read your work in general. Like it was a great Easter egg for other people who are like, oh my gosh.
Well, thanks.
Here they are.
An expanded universe now too.
Yeah. Well, I also like
it is expanding the universe.
Yeah. Well, for me, that's fun when you sort of like make a connection with another book. You don't have to have read, the prior book, hopefully to connect to those 2 characters. Some of the reasons why that those 2 characters, Josh and Luis, are there is, one, I knew that at some point, even though this is a quote unquote realistic, outbreak, zombie adjacent thing, in today's world, like people would talk about zombies. They talked about zombie apocalypse when COVID hit. So I needed to sort of let the reader know that, hey, here are two like, quote unquote zombie experts who are like looking forward to go out there, as just like dumb teenagers, just looking forward to go out there and fight zombies. And, so there's a little bit of humor, but and that was like the initial excitement. It was like, that's why they're going to be there. And then like, as I got deeper into the book, I sort of figured out that the other role I hope that they played was a nice, an interesting juxtaposition of their friendship juxtaposed with Natalie and Romola's, two adults, a friendship, that's expanded, a couple of decades potentially, and like any friendship of that length has its ebbs and flows, and it's a little bit more complicated as opposed to, these two younger teens whose friendship is so intense. In a lot of ways also, maybe, I don't want to say too intense, but like you're not thinking clearly, or maybe you are, I don't know. So I thought it was kind of interesting to be able to compare those two sets of friends.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
I loved the dynamic of the loyalty between.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Now, I was going to ask how you knew with the other book that you were writing, how did you know you wouldn't get that done in time? Because I know the three of us ladies are all working on new projects or are looking at what's next and trying to figure out how long something's going to take. How did you know that the one you were working on wasn't going to hit that deadline? Because I know for my last book, I gave myself a deadline because I needed to get back to something else that I had already set a deadline for. And it took a little longer than I thought, but I did get it done. How did you know you weren't going to get yours done?
I mean, maybe ultimately I didn't know for sure. And it was more, I don't want to write this one. But this book, I also felt like it was going to be, it was going to have three like big parts, three almost like separate stories that sort of come together. And
you feel that?
It felt a little bit more complicated. And it was really going to be sort of, I don't know, one of my favorite books is Roberto Bolaño's 2666. And it was going to be a little bit of an homage / riff to that, which is this big, ginormous book. So I typically don't write big, ginormous books, but I figured maybe this book that I was thinking of writing might at least push 100,000, if not more. I don't know, and I just wasn't feeling it. Wasn't confident that I would do it. Survivor Song ended up only being like 75,000 words. I'm fairly accurate in my head, like is how many words it is. Like I usually end up in like the low 80s. I thought Survivor Song might be like 65, but so I overshot it a little bit. But
no, but it worked because there's such an intensity, including the time frame that it covers, and that's hopefully not too much of a spoiler, but just how focused it is that it fits, so that you're just there and you're through it. So if it would have been 100,000 words, I don't know if you would have been able to maintain that intensity, or as a reader been able to sustain it through the book.
No, well, thank you. No, exactly. I mean, a couple of things I wanted to do. One of them was like I didn't want to do like, this like I didn't want to do the zombie novel where it's a cast of thousands. Not that those are bad, but we've already seen that done very well a bunch of times. And I also didn't want to have like a loving, detailed description of the end of the world either.
Because we're already there.
So much. Yeah. Well, at the time, we weren't necessarily there yet. On our way. Because I make mention in Survivor Song, I make it a point to mention that this is not the end of the world. And to me, hopefully that makes it, I thought it made it more poignant and maybe, more tragic for characters who don't make it, if they could have just held on. So anyway, once I knew it was going to be told essentially in real time, you can't ask a reader to stick around for 100,000 plus words if it's really only over 4 to 6 hours. So it had to sort of stay hopefully somewhat tight.
So your novel Cabin at the End of the World is, I've read 2 novels legitimately without stopping, and Cabin at the End of the World was one of them. It was downloaded onto my Kindle at midnight because I had pre-ordered it, and I read it nonstop through the night and into the morning.
Oh, wow.
And then once I was done, I looked at my fiance and said, "You need to read this right now." And then he did. So I love the intensity of how you write because it is in real time, quote unquote real time, because, a several day period. Yeah. Do you ever, so again, we're going to have to go back to the whole word vomit of all of this. write things that you just have to like scrap and throw in the garbage? Do you ever just dwell in your own characters and kind of get away from the intensity for a while?
Um, I mean, I've done things that I've just, thrown away, including whole novel ideas. Like prior to A Head Full of Ghosts, I was 100 pages into
this is what we want to hear about.
100, you can say 100 pages?
I was 100 pages into this other
100
book.
pages?
Yeah. And
all right,
like,
now I don't even care about my question. Tell us about this 100 pages. 100 pages you threw away.
Yeah, so this was. Well, I mean, I guess I still have it somewhere.
Okay.
I don't think I'll ever go back to it though. Now I had started. I guess what was this? 2012 into 2013. I started writing this book. It has a great title. I should probably still use it. Charles Manson Doesn't Answer My Letters was going to be the title of the book. It was going to be about this 8-year-old kid who is writing letters to Charles Manson because he wants to. Eighth grader wants to end the world. And it's not because he's an evil little kid. He just thinks there's too much suffering. He wants, So the whole book was going to be through his letters.
I want to read this book.
Email it to Jen. 100 pages. She'll be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was excited when I got into it. Yeah, I was excited when I got into it, and I just really got bogged down on sort of like all sorts of tangents. Like when Trisha was asking before, like this book, I didn't really have a plan other than the title and maybe get to a certain point. Mm-hmm. So I was just sort of going down rabbit holes. I'm like, this isn't quite working out. And some of it was like this 8th grader was sort of like my sort of quasi stand-in son, and then I was like a bitter writer because at the time I was a bitter writer. Yeah, so like in February of 2013 rolled around, and I really hadn't been doing much with that book, and I was reading a book of essays on The Exorcist for quasi research. But when I was reading that book, I was like, wow, like I'd never really thought of The Exorcist in political terms, and certainly, and a lot of these essays were about the politics of the book. There was this journalistic piece about investigating the supposed true case that inspired the movie, which is obviously bullshit. Or maybe not obviously, but it is. To the point where like it's probably likely the supposed priest who did this Exorcist doesn't exist. At least that's what one part of it didn't even exist from my memory of this investigative piece. So anyway, I put that book sort of away. I was like, whoa, like, no one's really written a exorcism novel in a long time. Like, well, how would I do it? And it just like the story just sort of like fell into my lap right there. So I don't know, I was excited about it, but all writers sort of worry about, do I just want to do this new shiny thing or should I stick through and do the other thing? So it was very hard for me to decide to, put away the other book and start writing A Head Full of Ghosts. But obviously I'm glad that I did. I didn't tell my agent for like 6 months that I was working on this exorcism novel. And he wasn't, like I said, in the first 100 pages and he wasn't into it. And that was hard too, for me to just be like, you know what, I'm just going to do it anyway. Obviously, like, he loved it once I was finished, and it saved my career.
That's amazing.
So, that's the main reason. So I would say Head Full of Ghosts, all of your work, I feel like it's not breaking the fourth wall, but you do have a very apparent sense of the horror tropes. And you take those and morph them into a way that is literary. So there's a few authors that are doing this right now. You are one of them. Head Full of Ghosts, I'll be honest, was right before Survivor Song was the last book I read of yours because I kept reading the description and I was like, I feel like I've read this before. And then I read it and I went, oh gosh, I haven't read this before. It was so good. How do you, as an author, break through that stereotypes of what people think a book is? An exorcism book, a zombie book.
I don't know. I just look for. I feel like if what I think the story is going to interest me, I just have to hope and trust that it'll interest readers as well. I mean, with The Head Full of Ghosts, I mean, once I knew I wasn't going to like avoid the sort of William Peter Blatty elephant in the room, like anyone writing a possession story. And I also, I mean, the book itself is also sort of a commentary on possession stories. So that really freed me up to just like to compare, you know, to riff and make all, you know, I really tried to bring in every single horror influence that I could into that book, or at least comment on it, or have it sort of like ping off somewhere. Because I thought it fit the story. The whole story is, you know, is the theme of ambiguity. You don't know, and this is not a spoiler for people who haven't read it. You don't know if you don't know if something is supernatural is happening or not. And I never outright tell you. And to me, and hopefully for a lot of readers too, that's sort of the really creepy part, because it sort of mirrors our everyday life. So I felt like
That's
it was different enough.
I love that.
Yeah. Thanks. I also thought the thing that was maybe a little bit different. Thank you. And I thought, you know, the thing that I hope was a little bit different too was like, I know, you know, there's tons of people who do amazing work with, you know, ambiguous supernatural elements. And usually it's ambiguous because you're leaving out pieces of information. And with A Head Full of Ghosts, and actually with Cabin too, I thought it was more, I don't know, it seemed more now to, instead of leaving out information, just bombard the reader with all the information. Bombard the reader, like, so they're drowning in data, sort of like how we live now in the age of misinformation. It's just, you don't know what's true or not because of too much data, as opposed to not being given enough.
Right. So it's an unreliable narrator and an unreliable world, even because the data itself is unreliable. So the reader has to pick and choose, well, which of these threads am I going to hold on to, and which is the actual narrative thread? And they may not know till it's over, or ever.
No. Yeah, exactly. And
Forever.
like, you know, her own stories being refracted through pop culture, and the reader's interpretation, because they have this base, most of them have this, you know, base knowledge of pop culture. You know, pop culture's become such a monster in the West, you know, that like you cannot help but compare what you're going through to what you've experienced or consumed in books and movies. I mean, even at the beginning of the coronavirus quarantines, like, you know, everyone was talking about, you know, the movie Contagion and like all these things, you know, that they've seen on TV. It's like, no, this is real life. But I mean, I get it. I guess for some of us, our only experience was through, you know, with what might happen is through, you know, a movie or a book, as opposed to actually, you know, I'm not saying everyone should have like been reading epidemiological, you know, text or something, but for most
even
of
if they did, they wouldn't understand most of them. So
Right.
giving somebody who doesn't have the background, here's a bunch of texts that are right over your head. I know I try to read some of those articles, and my science background is 20 years out of date and limited to the college level of intro to microbiology. So I'm like going, this is great data. I don't understand any of it. And I've got to rely on the experts, and then you're picking which experts, and it's not fun.
No.
I have one final kind of silly question. It is more fun, and everything is more fun in book form. That's just, as like book people, is everything's more fun in book form. And again, not spoilery, but Paul, you have a character who is also named Paul in Survivor Song. Why and how did your family feel about this? And your kids and your wife?
Well, first, I mean, it's not really me. He has much less fabulous hair. I'm just kidding. No.
I don't remember how you described his hair, but now I'm thinking, his hair was not curly.
I don't think I did describe his hair, but the Paul in Survivor Song is 5'8", and I'm 6'4", so very different. Although that opening scene takes place in the first house that Lisa and I lived in. So yeah, she hasn't read the book yet. She hasn't read anything since A Head Full of Ghosts because it made her cry terribly. Because
okay, I feel like that's a whole different discussion of spouses.
Didn't you say someplace
don't read our stuff?
This is a whole different.
That's a whole other Oprah.
I feel like we need to have your wife on the show to just be like, how do you feel about him ruining your first house that you lived in?
Well, but she hasn't read it, so
ruin
she
it.
know. I'm watching this interview
right now. Yeah, I think at this point it's she's like, you ruined our vacations with cabin.
So was
And,
Cabin at the End of the World based on a vacation cabin of yours?
The physical part of it. I mean, it wasn't that far north in New Hampshire. But yeah, I took
That's awesome.
My aunt used to have a cabin that was sort of the physical layout. She doesn't have it anymore though.
Well, yeah, now that you wrote about it.
Yeah.
On the market. Goodbye.
Oh no,
Well, but Paul, you're a math teacher. Did she know when she married you she was marrying a horror writer? Like, did she sign up for that or go, wait a second?
No, so we met in college, and we were good friends for a couple of years before we started dating. She was an English major, and I was a math major. And I used to give her a hard time, like, "Oh, you English majors."
This is what I want to put in the really bad chemistry pun.
And talk about books all day, and I'll try to keep a semi-long story short or semi-short. I ended up through a series of misadventures being a math humanities major instead of a math education major, which is where I started. So my second semester senior year, I took English 101 essentially to fulfill a requirement. So it was like me, a senior, second semester senior with a bunch of freshmen. But for me, it was like one of those movie stereotypical English teacher experiences where the professor was so cool. He was a big punk music fan, and I was too. And that's how we really connected. Like all my papers that I wrote for him would reference some sort of punk band.
Nice.
But he had us read Joyce Carol Oates' "Where Have You Going, Where Have You Been?" And I'll never forget reading that story. I mean, I read it and I was like, oh, I didn't realize people wrote things like this. And shortly after that, Lisa, for my 22nd birthday, right after graduation, bought me Stephen King's The Stand for my birthday. And she had read all of Stephen King in her teens, so she started feeding me Stephen King. And so I went off to graduate school for 2 years. Being in a graduate school is different than undergrad. I was at grad school, there's no undergrad parties, obviously. And, my girlfriend was hundreds of miles away in Boston. I was in the wilds of Vermont. So in my free time, I just read all the Stephen King. And, thanks to Dance Macabre, I went to like Peter Straub and Shirley Jackson and Clive Barker. So I mean, Lisa definitely played a huge role, if not the biggest role, in helping me, figure out, maybe I'll try writing a horror story. So I was always a horror movie fan. Like I liked horror movies, even though they scared the crap out of me. But yeah, I became a reader, like really not until like my early to mid 20s. Became a reader first, and I had this creative wants. Like if I still had my druthers, if I could choose, go back in time. I'd make myself a successful punk, guitar playing musician. And I tried a little bit. Like I learned how to play guitar, but I never like played shows or anything.
You have 3 girls swooning right now. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have said punk or guitar playing. The 3 of us were like,
King. You can't do math. I don't even know what you're doing.
Talk about being in grad school again.
But it was math grad school.
It was math grad school. That's a little less sexy, but still sexy.
Oh, no.
In a math way.
Math grad school was a humbling experience because I felt like I got through undergrad without having to do a ton of work. I felt like I was smart. And then I got to the University of Vermont, and my fellow grad students were just so freaking brilliant. I was like, oh my God, like I know nothing compared to these people. So it was good. It's always good to be humbled.
Yeah, there's comes a point if you stay in education long enough, even when you're smart, that you get to the point where everybody's at your level or above, and you just go, wait a second, I thought I was the smart one, and then you just kind of back away and go, okay, don't call on me, teacher, and just kind of.
Yeah, my first homework assignment, I was in a class I shouldn't have been, which is a recurring theme in my academic career. They put me in a class I shouldn't have taken. He's like, here's this problem set of 10 problems. 6 of them have never been solved before. See what you can do with them.
Okay, that's mean.
It wasn't much.
That's cool. That's hashtag. This is why he writes horror.
Yeah. I was gonna say the only class that I was ever in. The only class I was ever in that I shouldn't have been in I didn't know, or it wasn't in the description, that it was both an advanced political science class and an advanced math class, because I'd gone through college trying to avoid math, but it required like basic calculus just for the entry level because it was advanced game theory. And I knew basic game theory, like Prisoner's Dilemma. And then they're like, oh yeah, you're going to need to know basic calculus. And one of my friends was like, oh, I'll tutor you. And I'm just like, no, I'm a lost cause in this. You don't want to sign up for that. I ended up out of that and into European history, or what, French politics, something very useless. During that time slot.
I left my college so I wouldn't have to take math. I went to a fine art school. When I got to the point where I'm like, oh, it's math or nothing else, I will leave.
There's nothing else. Bye.
There's nothing else. I will go teach. I'll take a clowning class, which I did.
Oh.
DFA. It's useless, but. All right. I feel like we've gone 15 minutes over. We could talk forever. Because I kind of just want to talk about like Dunkin' Donuts and stuff like that, but we can't. Paul, thank you for being here and putting up with the Vox Vomitus Vixens. We are fangirls. Thank you.
We're sorry.
It is
a lot of fun.
We're sorry. Was it fun? It is the eve of my birthday, and I feel like this is Paul is from New England, so he has a little bit of New England guilt. And I feel like when I messaged you the first time and I said, will you be on our podcast? It is the eve of my birthday. You were like, it's sure, fine. And I appreciate that.
And she promised honey donuts.
I was like, well, it's creepy if I say, send me your address and I will send you honeydew donuts, because your wife will say, no, this seems like a trap.
Yeah. All right.
Like, no. You don't need to know where I live. And on that note, everybody who's listening to Vox Vomitus, I promise to be less creepy next week. Probably not. We will be interviewing. Will I? No, I'm creepy's my gig. We will be interviewing Diane Zinna next week, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can see Paul's website. It is scrolling underneath us. I am once again Jennifer Ann Gordon, your host of Vox Vomitus. Thank you to everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network for hosting our show. And our show is a copywritten podcast. Once again, I am Jennifer Ann Gordon. My co-hosts are Allison, Martine, and Trisha Mckee. Our amazing guest today, Paul Tremblay, who put up with a lot.
Yes.
A lot, in a good way. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Pam Stack, our executive producer, and Roman Saraton, our producer. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.